It was the morning of April 21st, 2013. That morning, Rachel's mother, Betty Frisbee, made a phone call that would set everything in motion. She contacted the Brentwood Police Department with a simple yet chilling request. She needed officers to check on her daughter immediately. Betty explained that she hadn't been able to reach Rachel despite multiple attempts, and her concern was quickly escalating into fear. The police took her call seriously. Within minutes, patrol units were dispatched to the home of Rachel and her husband, Randy Maidens. When the officers arrived at the property, they approached the front door and knocked several times, calling out the names of both Rachel and Randy. There was no response. The silence was unnerving. Eventually, the officers made their way inside the house. With practiced care, they began a room-by-room search, calling out the homeowners' names as they moved through the spacious interior. What the officers discovered inside the home was nothing short of devastating. Dear viewers, please don't forget to like, leave a comment under the video, and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new videos. This is very important to us. Brentwood is an affluent and highly sought-after suburban enclave situated just about a 20-minute drive south of downtown Nashville, Tennessee. This picturesque town stands proudly as one of the most prosperous communities not just within the state but across the entire United States. It consistently ranks in the top 20 most affluent cities in the country, a statistic that reflects not only its wealth but also the extraordinary quality of life it offers to its residents. Home to a population of roughly 40,000 people, Brentwood is admired for its charming landscapes, tree-lined streets, and peaceful atmosphere that feels a world apart from the hustle and bustle of city life. The town is known for its tranquility and order, where families can walk their dogs along pristine sidewalks, children ride bikes through quiet neighborhoods, and neighbors greet each other with warmth and familiarity. The sense of community here is strong, and pride of ownership is evident on every street. The average household income in Brentwood is substantially higher than the national median, and it shows in nearly every aspect of life. From the beautifully maintained public parks to the state-of-the-art schools and luxury retail centers, every corner of the town speaks of comfort and privilege. Safety is another cornerstone of Brentwood's appeal. With a crime rate that is an astonishing 74% lower than the US average, it's widely regarded as one of the safest places to live in America. Since its official incorporation in 1969, the town has recorded only a handful of homicides, just 8 over the course of more than 5 decades. These statistics are extraordinary by any standard and contribute to Brentwood's reputation as a sanctuary of security and stability. A portion of Brentwood lies within Williamson County, which holds the title of being the 74th wealthiest county in the United States. This adds another layer of prestige to the area and draws in individuals who prioritize not only material comfort but also long-term security and social standing. The town's upscale infrastructure includes more than 10 expansive parks, a variety of high-end restaurants, boutique shops, and access to a world-class private golf club. These features, combined with its close proximity to Nashville, a major cultural and entertainment hub, make Brentwood a prime destination for the affluent and influential. It's no surprise that a number of celebrities, successful entrepreneurs, and executives choose to make Brentwood their home. Among the list of notable residents are music icon Taylor Swift, Hollywood stars Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban, musician Jack White, NHL player Mike Fisher, and country music sensation Carrie Underwood. In addition to celebrities, the area attracts top-tier professionals, CEOs, and politicians who value privacy, elegance, and convenience. In every sense of the word, Brentwood represents the ideal for those who dream of living in a place that seamlessly blends natural beauty, architectural luxury, and a close-knit sense of safety and seclusion. And yet, even in a place that seems nearly untouched by tragedy, life has a way of revealing that no community, no matter how privileged, is entirely immune to heartbreak. One of the most devastating and shocking events in Brentwood's history occurred in the spring of 2013. It shattered the illusion of invincibility that the town had built over the years. This tragic incident took place in one of the town's most elite residential enclaves, the Governor's Club. A gated community known for its exclusivity, the Governor's Club spans approximately 600 acres and is centered around a prestigious private golf course, personally designed by legendary golfer Arnold Palmer. Access to the community is strictly limited to residents and their invited guests, making it one of the most secure and private neighborhoods in the entire state. It was within this upscale setting that the home of Randy and Dr. Rachel Maiden stood, an elegant and spacious mansion measuring more than 5,000 square feet, valued at around $1 million. To outsiders, their lives appeared perfect: a beautiful home, a promising career, and a growing family. No one could have predicted that this picture of domestic bliss would soon become the backdrop of an unfolding nightmare. Dr. Rachel Maidens was more than just a successful professional. She was a woman who embodied excellence in every aspect of her life. At just 34 years old, Rachel had already established herself as one of the most respected orthodontists in the area. Her private practice, located in the bustling Maryland Farms business district of Brentwood, catered to a devoted clientele who trusted her expertise and admired her compassion. Patients and colleagues alike praised her not only for her clinical skill, but also for her warm and approachable demeanor. Rachel was also a devoted mother to her young daughter Natalie, who had just turned 2. To her friends and those who knew her well, Rachel seemed to balance the demanding roles of mother, wife, and businesswoman with remarkable grace. She came from a background of academic excellence and personal discipline. Rachel graduated from Father Ryan Catholic High School in Nashville and later earned degrees in biology and psychology from Birmingham Southern College in Alabama. There, she was not only a top student but also a standout athlete on the college tennis team, receiving accolades for both her academic and athletic achievements. Her journey continued at the University of Florida Dental School, where she distinguished herself as a leader, serving as class president and actively participating in community outreach programs. Upon earning her Doctor of Dental Surgery degree, she further specialized in orthodontics at the Children's National Medical Center in Washington, D.C., one of the nation's top pediatric facilities. Rachel's list of professional accomplishments was nothing short of remarkable. She had opened her own clinic, published scholarly articles, and was a frequent speaker at dental conferences across the country. However, Rachel's bright path had also been shadowed by a painful personal tragedy during her early years of adulthood. On December 3, 2003, while Rachel was still a university student, her world was shaken by a scandal that would alter her family forever. Her father, Dr. Richard, a well-respected pharmacist in their community, was arrested by federal authorities. He faced serious allegations related to the unlawful distribution of prescription medication, specifically a controlled painkiller. In addition to the official accusations leveled against Dr. Richard Frisby, there were further troubling allegations that added to the gravity of the situation. According to law enforcement sources at the time, Richard was suspected of engaging in the unauthorized sale of prescription medications directly from his residence. These were serious allegations, casting a long shadow over a man who had once been regarded as a respected medical professional and trusted pharmacist in his community. The situation escalated quickly, drawing media scrutiny and causing a deep rift within the family's personal and financial world. However, before the case could ever go to trial or reach any formal legal resolution, an even greater tragedy struck the Frisby family. Just 2 days after his arrest, Richard Frisby passed away suddenly. Officially, his cause of death was ruled to be cardiac-related, his heart having given out under the immense emotional pressure. While medical professionals listed it as a natural cause, those close to the family have often speculated that the sheer weight of public shame, combined with anxiety over looming legal consequences, may have been too much for him to bear. In a matter of hours, the family lost not only their father, but also the sense of stability and dignity they had once taken for granted. But the nightmare did not end with Richard's passing. The aftermath would continue to affect the entire Frisby family in ways that were both financially devastating and emotionally scarring. In a sweeping move that reflected the seriousness of the charges, Nashville authorities temporarily froze the bank accounts not only of Richard, but also of his wife, son, and daughter, Rachel. All of them were drawn into a complex and prolonged legal investigation, scrutinized under the assumption that they might have had knowledge of, or been inadvertently involved in, Richard's alleged activities. For a family already reeling from sudden loss, the intrusion of legal authorities into their private lives only compounded their pain. The legal proceedings dragged on for several years, draining the family's emotional and financial resources. Ultimately, the investigation concluded that Rachel and her family members had no involvement in the alleged wrongdoing. Their names were cleared, and they were found innocent of any criminal conduct. Yet the financial toll had been significant, Years of frozen assets had disrupted their lives, and rebuilding from that kind of financial disruption is no easy task. Rachel's mother, Betty Frisbee, did eventually receive a financial settlement from the authorities in the amount of $155,000, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of the hardship they had endured. Still, no sum of money could erase the psychological burden or restore the years lost to anxiety and stigma. The emotional wounds ran deep, and the scars left by this episode were likely to remain for a lifetime. Rachel, however, refused to be defined by tragedy. Rather than allowing her family's misfortune to dictate the course of her future, she used it as fuel to propel herself forward. With extraordinary focus and determination, she continued her academic journey and earned her degrees with distinction. Those who knew her described her as someone with quiet strength and unwavering resilience. Perhaps buried beneath her drive for academic and professional excellence, there was a psychological mechanism at play, a need to reclaim control, to achieve independence, and to ensure that she and her future family would never again be so vulnerable. Rachel didn't just survive adversity, she transformed it into motivation. And she succeeded. Against the odds, she carved out a life that many would envy, a successful medical practice, a beautiful home, and a loving family. But tragically, that hard-won stability would be short-lived. Randolph Carey Maidens, known as Randy to friends and family, was Rachel's husband. He was born to Charles and Barbara Maidens in St. Louis, Missouri, but spent much of his formative years in the state of Georgia. There, he attended Wheeler High School in the suburban city of Marietta, where he was remembered as an intelligent student with a promising future. He later went on to graduate from the esteemed Georgia Institute of Technology, better known as Georgia Tech, a school known for producing some of the nation's top engineers, scientists, and business minds. By the time Randy and Rachel got married, he had secured a well-paying position as a sales manager at a biotechnology company headquartered in Brentwood. This firm was reportedly involved in developing advanced medical therapies with a focus on oncology research, an industry both financially lucrative and ethically high stakes. Yet, despite the appearance of professional success, rumors began to circulate in the months before the tragedy that Randy was no longer employed by the company. While the biotech firm declined to offer public comment, likely due to legal sensitivities, it was widely speculated that Randy's departure had been abrupt and possibly involuntary. The lack of official statements left the public to draw its own conclusions. During the early months of 2013, Randy's behavior reportedly began to change in noticeable and troubling ways. Friends, neighbors, and even restaurant staff started to witness behaviors that seemed out of character. One particular incident in January stands out as especially concerning. That evening, Randy entered a local restaurant visibly intoxicated. According to multiple witnesses, his appearance and demeanor alarmed both patrons and employees. He was reportedly loud and erratic, to the point where a concerned waitress called 911. She later told dispatchers that she was hesitant to serve him alcohol and equally afraid to allow him to leave in such a state. As she later recounted, when Randy stood up from his seat, several items fell from his pocket, including what appeared to be a shotgun shell and a large glass bottle. Alarmed, the waitress tried to keep Randy calm while waiting for police to arrive. To her credit, she managed to persuade him to stay on the premises. When officers did arrive and searched his vehicle, they reportedly found a shotgun inside the car. Surprisingly, no arrest was made. Instead, the officers allowed Randy to call his wife, Rachel, to pick him up and take him home. Witnesses said Randy pleaded with the restaurant staff not to contact his wife, fearing her reaction. He referred to Rachel as someone who would be upset or disappointed in him, language that suggested an ongoing strain in their relationship. That incident raised many questions, especially in retrospect. Why was a visibly intoxicated man in possession of a weapon allowed to leave the scene without consequence? Why weren't more preventive actions taken? These are the kinds of questions that would only gain weight after the events that unfolded later that year. Then came the morning of April 21, 2013, a date that would be etched into the minds of everyone involved. Rachel's mother, Betty Frisbee, placed a call to the Brentwood Police Department. Her voice was calm but urgent. She requested that officers go to her daughter's home as soon as possible. She explained that she hadn't been able to reach Rachel and was growing increasingly worried. Given the family's history and the undercurrents of tension in recent months, Betty's concern was not without reason. According to multiple sources close to the investigation, Rachel's mother, Betty Frisbee, was growing increasingly alarmed on the morning of April 21st, 2013. She had a deep, intuitive feeling that something was terribly wrong. As a mother, she knew her daughter's routines, tone of voice, and emotional temperature, and on that day, something simply wasn't adding up. In conversations with family members afterward, it was suggested that Betty had already been concerned about Randy's emotional state in the days and weeks leading up to that fateful morning. One relative even stated that Betty had told others Randy was on the verge, though what exactly that meant remained open to interpretation. According to some unconfirmed accounts, Betty gave Randy an ultimatum over the phone. If she didn't hear from Rachel personally within the next 10 minutes, she would immediately notify law enforcement. What transpired during that phone call remains one of the more unsettling unknowns in this case. But given what happened next, it's hard not to imagine the sheer terror and heartbreak that must have flooded Betty's mind in that moment. What exactly Randy said to her is not publicly known, but it was evidently disturbing enough to compel her to follow through on her warning and contact the Brentwood Police Department. Within minutes of Betty's call, patrol officers were dispatched to the maiden's residence, located within the gated luxury community known as the Governor's Club. The scene that awaited them was eerie in its stillness. When they arrived at the sprawling mansion, officers noted that all the blinds and curtains had been tightly drawn, effectively sealing off any view of the inside. There were no visible signs of life. The officers knocked on the door multiple times, calling out for both Randy and Rachel, but the silence that greeted them was unsettling. Fortunately, they discovered that the garage door had been left slightly ajar, allowing them a lawful way to enter the home. Once inside, officers began methodically checking the rooms, calling the homeowners names. No one answered. Officer Austin Kern made his way upstairs, where he looked down from the balcony into the two-story Great Hall. From that vantage point, he spotted something troubling, what appeared to be a shotgun lying openly on a couch, along with other objects that strongly suggested a serious incident had taken place. What they found moments later confirmed their worst fears. Rachel Maiden's was discovered on the first floor of the home, in the hallway between the living room and the foyer that led toward the master bedroom. She showed no signs of life. Out of respect for the family and due to the ongoing investigation, police have never released graphic or detailed descriptions of her condition, but it was immediately evident. Even more disturbing was the initial assessment of the crime scene. Investigators noticed a strong chemical odor throughout the home, particularly near where Rachel's body was found. The unmistakable scent of bleach hung in the air. It quickly became apparent that someone had attempted to clean parts of the scene. There was visible evidence on portions of the wall and floor, though efforts had been made to wipe them away. Some areas had been scrubbed so forcefully that discoloration remained on the wood and tile. The presence of bleach suggested a deliberate attempt to eliminate physical evidence. And while the cleaning had not been entirely effective, it indicated that whoever had committed the act had stayed behind for at least some time afterward. And yet, Randy was nowhere. Immediately, the Brentwood Police Department launched an intense manhunt. The urgency of the situation meant that local law enforcement requested assistance from additional agencies. Officers from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, TBI, joined the effort, along with SWAT units, K-9 teams, and aerial search support. That night, the quiet and pristine streets of the Governor's Club were transformed into a coordinated search grid, illuminated by searchlights and buzzing with the sounds of helicopters overhead. For residents, the scene was surreal, like something from a television drama, except all too real. Brentwood Police Chief Jeff Hughes addressed the media that evening. In a carefully worded but pointed statement, he described Randy Maiden's as unstable and potentially armed, urging the public to remain cautious. He confirmed that authorities believed Randy posed a potential danger not only to himself but to others, and that locating him was a top priority. The tension in the community was palpable. As the investigation progressed into the early hours of the next morning, new and chilling details began to emerge from inside the Maiden's home. On the kitchen table, detectives discovered a handwritten note left behind by Randy. The contents of the note were emotional and disjointed, suggesting a troubled state of mind. In it, Randy expressed what appeared to be remorse. He wrote that he loved Rachel but felt overwhelmed by recent events. He did not explicitly confess to any specific action, but he admitted that he had done something irreversible, something that compelled him to flee. The letter took on an even more troubling tone as it progressed. Randy thanked Rachel's family for the years spent together, but also used the space to express long-held resentments. He wrote about feeling humiliated and criticized in the marriage. He claimed that Rachel had often spoken to him harshly, belittled him, and that their arguments had become more intense in recent months. He described himself as emotionally exhausted and even referenced Rachel's prior relationships, stating bitterly that he hadn't become her third husband for nothing. According to Randy, the couple had argued constantly over trivial matters. What alarmed investigators even further was a portion of the note in which Randy expressed a desire to continue raising their daughter, Natalie. He mentioned hoping to co-parent with Rachel's family, a jarring and almost surreal sentiment given the gravity of what had occurred. It was clear that Randy had contemplated life beyond that day, even while apparently preparing to go on the run. And indeed, the next major discovery seemed to confirm that theory. In the trunk of Randy's vehicle, police found a duffel bag containing approximately $87,000 in cash. The money was not organized in any way. It appeared hastily gathered and shoved into the bag. An additional $9,000 was found inside the home. Investigators also noted that several personal items and clothing had been packed. It appeared that Randy had begun preparations to leave Brentwood, possibly even the country. Yet, for reasons still unknown, he never made it past the wooded area behind his home. Surveillance and cell phone records revealed that, following Rachel's death, Randy had made a call to a well-known criminal defense attorney in Nashville, David Wren, a lawyer with decades of experience in high-profile cases. The content of their conversation remains protected under attorney-client privilege, but the timing of the call speaks volumes. It suggests that Randy was seeking legal guidance before deciding what to do next. Some believe that after speaking with his lawyer, Randy considered turning himself in, while others think he panicked and ran into the nearby forest in a haze of confusion and fear. For nearly 12 hours, Randy hid in the dense wooded area near the property. A ground search had been underway since dawn, and authorities had set up a wide perimeter. Then, just before noon the next day, a figure slowly emerged from the tree line. Randy walked out with his hands raised and surrendered without resistance. Officers took him into custody without incident. The arrest marked the beginning of a long and complex legal process, and the start of a difficult chapter. While law enforcement teams continued their urgent and methodical conducted a parallel investigation throughout the upscale community itself. As more residents were interviewed and surveillance footage reviewed, new and alarming reports began to surface. Several neighbors came forward with statements indicating that their homes had been approached, possibly even tampered with, during the hours following Rachel's death and before Randy's surrender. Some residents claimed they had found signs of attempted forced entry on their garage doors and side entrances, including scratch marks near locks and partially turned doorknobs. As investigators reviewed footage from neighborhood security cameras, these suspicions were confirmed. Video evidence revealed that Randy had wandered through the gated community in the early hours of the morning, moving from house to house. The images showed him approaching various homes, at times appearing disoriented, possibly searching for a place to hide. His intentions remained unclear, but given the context and his mental state, residents were understandably shaken. For a man wanted in connection with such a serious offense to be wandering the affluent, normally serene streets of Brentwood, at a time when families were just waking up and preparing for their day, was more than unsettling. Fortunately, none of the neighbors opened their doors. Whether it was instinct, fear, or simply the early hour, everyone kept their distance. The idea of offering shelter to someone considered potentially dangerous and emotionally unstable was unthinkable. Later interviews revealed that many residents were horrified by the idea that such a harrowing situation had unfolded literally on their doorsteps. Some expressed frustration at the fact that Randy had been allowed to move freely through the area in the aftermath of the crime, especially given the level of threat he was believed to pose. "It was terrifying," one neighbor later told local media. "We moved here for peace and security. That morning felt like something out of a nightmare." Following Randy's arrest and surrender, the legal process began to unfold rapidly. Within a short time, he was officially charged with first-degree murder, a charge which, under Tennessee law, carries the possibility of capital punishment or life imprisonment without parole. Additionally, he was charged with tampering with evidence, due to the alleged efforts to clean the crime scene using bleach. Initially, Randy was held in custody with bail set at $2 million, a figure that reflected both the seriousness of the charges and the perceived flight risk he posed. But his defense team, led by seasoned attorneys, quickly began pushing for a reduction in the terms of his pretrial detention. They filed motions arguing that Randy posed no ongoing threat to society and claimed that his surrender to police after 12 hours in the woods demonstrated his willingness to cooperate with the justice system. The defense argued that if Randy had truly intended to flee, he had ample opportunity to do so in the window of time following Rachel's death. They emphasized that no passports, travel documents, or transportation tickets were found in his vehicle or on his person, and that despite having access to a significant amount of cash, he had not left the immediate area. Surprisingly, the court agreed with the defense. In June 2013, the presiding judge reduced the bail amount significantly, from $2 million to $750,000. This decision sparked controversy, especially within the local community. Some residents felt that allowing Randy to walk free while awaiting trial was a risk that should not have been taken. Nonetheless, the new conditions enabled Randy to post bail and await trial outside of custody. Details of where he lived or how he spent his time during this period remain unclear, but it would not be long before he once again found himself in trouble with the law. In December 2013, while still out on bail, Randy was arrested a second time. This incident occurred in Avery Park, a suburban apartment complex located in Bellevue, another Nashville suburb. Residents of the building were startled to find a man, later identified as Randy Maidens, wandering through the complex, reportedly knocking on doors late at night. One resident later recounted that Randy had identified himself as a law enforcement officer and insisted on being let inside. The situation quickly escalated, prompting someone to call 911. When officers arrived at the scene, they found Randy in a state of heavy intoxication. He was arrested on charges of public intoxication, but once again, the legal consequences were minimal. Despite the fact that he was already out on bail for a first-degree murder charge, Randy was released the following day. This second arrest raised serious concerns, especially for prosecutor Kim Halper, who had been monitoring the case closely. This time, she moved swiftly to revoke his bail altogether, citing a clear violation of its terms and presenting a renewed case for his detention. The judge agreed, and Randy was returned to custody to await trial. But these weren't isolated events. Prior to the incident involving his wife, Randy had displayed behavior that had worried neighbors and acquaintances for months. One neighbor, Cynthia Rosenblum, recounted a particularly disturbing encounter to reporters. She and her husband had seen Randy wandering the wooded area behind their homes wearing a mask. When they confronted him, he was reportedly incoherent and seemed confused. He claimed he had gotten lost while walking his dogs. Cynthia and her husband noted that he appeared intoxicated and agitated, and although the moment passed without incident, they remained uneasy. Further investigations revealed that Randy had also been involved in a trespassing case in Florida just weeks before Rachel's death. While the case was ultimately dismissed following his arrest for murder, it raised additional questions about his mental health, behavior patterns, and potential warning signs that had gone unheeded. Unfortunately, these red flags were never enough to provoke real consequences, at least not until tragedy struck. Finally, with the trial date approaching, originally scheduled to begin on September 29, 2014, a major development occurred. Just 2 weeks before court proceedings were set to begin, Randy Maidens entered into a plea agreement with the state. As part of the deal, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, a lesser charge than the original first-degree indictment, as well as to a charge of paternal rights. In exchange, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison. While second-degree murder in Tennessee carries a potential sentence of up to 60 years, the plea arrangement considerably shortened his time behind bars. What's more, the structure of Tennessee's sentencing laws allowed for the possibility of early release in cases of good behavior. This meant that despite the severity of the crime, Randy could serve considerably less than the full 25 years, particularly after factoring in time already served before sentencing. This aspect of the agreement was deeply troubling for many observers, especially those close to Rachel. For them, the plea felt like a compromise that didn't fully reflect the weight of what had been lost. According to Randy's own attorney, the plea deal was seen as a pragmatic move. a way to avoid the uncertainties of a jury trial and reduce the possibility of an even harsher sentence. Rachel's grieving relatives were clear in their position from the very beginning. They emphasized that the Williamson County District Attorney's Office had entered into a plea agreement with Randy Maidens not out of mercy, nor as an acknowledgement of the defense's arguments, but rather for the sake of protecting the one innocent person most affected by the tragedy. The family explained that they had reluctantly accepted the terms of the plea because they understood that a full criminal trial could drag on for months, possibly years, and place unimaginable emotional strain. After Betty spoke, the court granted Randy the opportunity to address the family. Not directly, but through a written statement read aloud by his defense attorney, David Rabin. The courtroom was silent as Rabin unfolded the paper and began reading. "Right now, my words must sound hollow," Randy's statement began. "In light of your tragic loss, I know there is nothing I can say to undo the pain. You are enduring the worst heartache a mother can feel, and I am the reason for it. Every morning, I wake up and wish I were trapped in a nightmare from which I could wake. But I am not. I am the author of this tragedy. You accepted me into your home, into your family, and I destroyed that trust. But I know that no apology, no amount of remorse can ever make this right." Just a few hundred yards behind the church grounds, there stood an old, abandoned underground cistern. This large concrete reservoir had originally been constructed many decades ago to collect and store runoff rainwater. However, as the years passed, it fell out of use and memory, slowly becoming part of the overgrown landscape. Weeds and wild grass crept up around its edges, and a rusted chain-link fence, barely standing in some places, offered little more than a reminder of its presence. After carefully analyzing the confession alongside their own ongoing investigation, law enforcement officials acted swiftly. They made their way to the church property and initiated a thorough search of the grounds. There, they found Summer. Medical examiners were called to the scene immediately. Their task was to evaluate the state and to determine both the cause and the approximate time of death. In the end, the medical findings corroborated much of what had already been revealed in the confession. Dear viewers, please don't forget to like, leave a comment under the video, and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new videos. This is very important to us. Today, in this documentary, we explore the true story of Summer Rae Cook, who was born on December 31, 1985, in the quiet, close-knit town of Logan, Ohio. A place surrounded by thick woods, winding roads, and the type of community where everyone knew everyone else's name. Raised in a large family, Summer was the second of 6 children. Her parents were devoutly religious and active members of their local church, a modest white-steepled building that stood at the heart of town and served as both a spiritual anchor and a social hub for many local families. Growing up, Summer was known as bright, warm-hearted, and approachable. She had a magnetic personality that drew others to her, and it was rare to find someone who had a negative word to say about her. People often described her as someone who made friends effortlessly, with a smile that could light up a room. Even at a young age, she stood out, not for any need to be the center of attention, but because of a certain calm charisma that made her memorable. She was also remarkably well-rounded. In school, she was active in extracurriculars, devoting her time to ballet lessons several nights a week, playing the saxophone in the school's jazz band, and participating in community theater productions at the town's only performance hall. These creative outlets gave her a strong sense of discipline and self-expression. Teachers remembered her as dependable and driven, while her peers simply liked being around her. It was during her teenage years that Summer met William, a boy her age who attended the same church. Though they lived only a few houses apart on the same quiet street, they had never really connected until one particular church youth retreat in their sophomore year. That weekend trip sparked a conversation, which quickly evolved into a connection neither of them had expected. By the time they graduated high school, Summer and William were inseparable, and it wasn't long after graduation that the young couple decided to get married. They began building a life together right there in Logan. Over the next several years, they welcomed 3 beautiful children, 2 daughters followed by a son, who became the center of Summer's world. Family support played a large role in their day-to-day life. They lived only a few houses away from William's parents. His father, a local pastor with a humble construction business on the side, was particularly involved. He often brought the children to church, picked them up from school, and helped with meals and errands when Summer was overwhelmed. At one point, following the offer of a promising construction contract, William's family made the decision to relocate to Florida. They hoped the move would lead to better financial stability and new opportunities. For a while, it seemed like a fresh start. But the reality turned out to be far more difficult than they anticipated. The work dried up, tensions grew, and the challenges of raising 3 young children far from their support system began to take a toll. Within a few years, the family packed up once again and returned to Logan, exhausted, discouraged, but hopeful for a reset. By 2010, Summer made the difficult decision to separate from William and eventually filed for divorce. The breakup wasn't scandalous or dramatic. It was the result of emotional distance, misaligned goals, and years of silent strain. Summer was granted full custody of the children, and she moved back in with her parents, who were more than willing to help with childcare and emotional support. Importantly, because William's family still lived just down the street, he remained a frequent presence in their lives and maintained an active role as a father. At just 25 years old, Summer had a full plate. Her children were only 5, 3, and 2 years old at the time. Every day was a whirlwind of meal prep, story time, diaper changes, and preschool pickups. A full-time job wasn't feasible, so she found part-time work cleaning a local bank branch just 5 minutes from her house. The hours were late, usually starting around 7 p.m. and ending at about 11:20 p.m., but they allowed her to be home with her children during the day. Though her life was busy and often exhausting, Summer never stopped dreaming of a better future. She spoke openly with her family about her plans to return to school. She wanted to pursue a degree, maybe an early childhood education or healthcare, so she could provide a more stable life for her children. Around this time, she also started dating someone new. His name was Adam, and he was a handyman who had been recommended by a neighbor to help fix a leak in her parents' roof. They struck up a friendship that gradually became something deeper. Adam was kind, helpful, and had a steady, calming presence, qualities Summer appreciated more than ever. On the evening of March 22, 2011, Summer clocked in for her usual shift at the bank. That night seemed no different than the dozens of other late shifts she had worked in recent months. She sent Adam a few casual texts during her break, just small updates, checking in about how the kids had done that day, and asking him to stop by after her shift. But then, suddenly, the messages stopped. It was just after 11 p.m. At first, Adam wasn't too concerned. Maybe she was just finishing up or got caught in a phone call. But after a few more minutes passed, he sent another message. Then he called. No answer. When 20 minutes went by with no word, he felt a growing sense of unease. Trusting his instincts, he walked the short distance to the bank. When Adam pulled into the dimly lit parking lot just past midnight, something felt unmistakably wrong. The eerie quiet of the lot was unsettling in itself. But what truly made his stomach drop was the sight of Summer's car, still parked in the same spot where she'd left it earlier that day. It was the very same vehicle he had loaned her for work, and seeing it untouched, well past the end of her shift, sent a jolt of unease through him. Summer was known for being dependable, even meticulous. She never lingered after hours without calling, and certainly never left without returning his keys. Driven by concern, Adam stepped out of his car and made his way around to the back of the building. He instinctively took the path leading to the discreet employee entrance, the one Summer used to avoid the main customer doors. That's when he saw them. Objects scattered carelessly behind a large green dumpster. Her iPod with the headphones still tangled, her car keys with the unmistakable purple keychain he had given her, and most disturbingly, parts of her phone. The battery had been separated from the casing, lying several feet away, as if it had been yanked out mid-use or perhaps tossed. His breath caught. This wasn't just concerning, it was terrifying. Adam wasted no time. With shaky hands, he pulled out his phone and called Summer's parents. Within minutes, they arrived, visibly shaken. Her mother recognized the items immediately, her face pale with dread. There was no question. They belonged to Summer. Fearing the worst, her parents called the local police department to report her missing. But to their surprise, the dispatcher's response wasn't what they expected. They were told that their report wasn't the first one received that night concerning the area. Roughly 30 minutes earlier, 2 women out for their routine evening jog had passed by the same bank parking lot. As they neared the far end of the building, they noticed a strange scene unfolding under the flickering glow of a faulty streetlight. A woman, who they later believed to be in her early 20s, was being ushered toward a sedan by 2 individuals. Both were dressed entirely in black, and their faces were obscured by ski masks, making them instantly suspicious. Initially, the joggers hesitated, unsure whether this was a dangerous situation or simply a misunderstanding. But then something stranger happened. A third figure, another woman, emerged from the back seat of the vehicle. Unlike the masked pair, she wore civilian clothing, and her demeanor was calm, almost rehearsed. She intercepted a bystander who had been approaching the scene, perhaps intending to intervene. The joggers recalled how this woman seemed to subtly but firmly dissuade the passerby, gesturing as if everything was fine. The interaction was brief but unsettling. Moments later, the woman returned to the car and the vehicle took off quickly, its tires squealing as it disappeared into the night with all 3 passengers inside. The joggers, now deeply alarmed, rushed the last few blocks to the nearest police station. Though winded and anxious, they immediately reported what they had witnessed, hoping authorities would spring into action. Despite the joggers' urgent tone and detailed account, the officers downplayed the situation. They suggested it might have been a domestic misunderstanding or a dramatized encounter misread from afar. Even after hearing about the ski masks and the strange exchange with the bystander, the officers didn't seem moved to act quickly. They gave an explanation. Most of the active patrol units were tied up responding to other issues, such as routine traffic stops or neighborhood disturbances. No unit could be dispatched to the bank at that moment, they said. Disappointed but unwilling to stand by, the joggers decided to go back on their own. They retrieved a vehicle and returned to the location about 20 minutes later, clinging to the hope that police would already be on the scene. But when they arrived, what they found shocked them more than what they had seen earlier. Summer's car was still in the same spot. The items behind the dumpster remained exactly where Adam had discovered them, untouched, unexamined, and without any sign of investigation. There were no flashing lights, no officers canvassing the area, no perimeter tape marking off the scene. The entire parking lot was just as it had been, as though no one had ever called the police at all. Feeling both helpless and responsible, the 2 women chose to stay. They couldn't shake the feeling that what they had seen was serious, and they didn't want to leave the scene unmonitored. Nearly an hour had passed since their original report, and still no law enforcement had shown up. Frustrated, one of the joggers called her husband, explaining the growing concern. The husband, equally disturbed by the unfolding situation, made a second call to the police department, this time demanding someone be sent immediately. Finally, more than an hour after the first report, law enforcement arrived at the scene. The police began questioning witnesses, but no one cordoned off the area or made any effort to preserve the crime scene. It wasn't until the runner's husband arrived in person and started asking the officers pointed questions that things began to change. Once investigators began actively piecing together the timeline, the puzzle started to take shape. Based on what the joggers had seen, combined with the personal belongings Adam and Summer's parents had identified, it was becoming increasingly clear that the woman taken was likely Summer. Her phone had ceased all activity shortly after 11 p.m., a digital silence that only added to the weight of the evidence. Her scattered possessions near the bank's employee entrance painted a troubling picture, suggesting something had occurred suddenly, but with clear intent. As officers finally began canvassing the area for security footage and interviewing witnesses, the urgency of the situation became undeniable. Witnesses provided law enforcement with a description of the vehicle involved in the abduction, a white, older model sedan with no visible license plate and tinted windows. The car had fled the scene in a hurry. An alert was issued for the vehicle, and police began working to contact those closest to Summer, hoping someone might have useful information. When officers visited Summer's parents, they quickly learned that her past was filled with tension, particularly surrounding her relationship with her ex-husband, William. According to her parents, the marriage had been rocky from the beginning. William was known for having a rigid and authoritarian outlook, one that he justified through his personal interpretation of religious doctrine. As soon as they married, Summer said she noticed a troubling shift in his behavior. William demanded absolute loyalty and obedience, restricting who Summer could talk to and forbidding her from spending time with even close friends or extended family without his permission. He expected her to maintain a spotless home, have dinner prepared at a precise time, and adhere to his increasingly specific expectations of how a wife should behave. He took control of the household finances and discouraged her from working outside the home. As time went on, William's beliefs took an even more extreme turn. He expressed a desire to take a second wife. Despite the fact that polygamy is not recognized by law, he justified this aspiration with his religious views. Summer was shocked and deeply uncomfortable with the idea. To her, the marriage was supposed to be a partnership, not a system of control. But William persisted, and his request became more than just philosophical. He expected her to go along with it. In addition to this, William wanted to expand their family drastically. He asked that Summer give him 9 more children on top of the 3 they already had. He reportedly took away her phone at times, monitored her movements, and even kept her from leaving the house without him. Eventually, she reached a breaking point and filed for divorce. But even after the legal separation was finalized, the hostility did not end. In fact, it escalated. William, along with his parents, responded to the divorce with intense opposition. He began pursuing full custody of their children, insisting that Summer was unfit to raise them on her own. When he discovered that she had begun a new relationship with a man named Adam, whom he already knew, it pushed things further. What really set him off was a photo posted online, a simple image of Adam with Summer and the kids. That public glimpse into her new life enraged William. In court, he fought to regain custody, but his behavior worked against him. Judges reviewed the testimony, the history of control, and the reports of intimidation. In the end, the decision favored Summer. She was granted full custody, and William's visitation was limited. That only fueled further resentment. William's parents began making complaints, repeatedly contacting authorities with various allegations aimed at Adam, accusing him of everything from neglect to misconduct. Yet none of their claims held up under investigation. Detectives looked into the reports and found no evidence supporting them. During the complex and often frustrating investigation into Summer's sudden and unexplained disappearance, authorities found themselves delving far deeper than initially expected. Their focus expanded beyond William, Summer's ex-husband, and turned toward his immediate family, particularly his father, whose history and actions began raising more and more questions. Roughly 1 year before Summer went missing, William's father had stepped into the public eye with what initially appeared to be an ambitious and noble endeavor. He formally announced the founding of his own church, presenting himself as a spiritual leader with a mission rooted in service and compassion. Alongside this announcement, he registered a nonprofit organization. The stated aim of this newly formed charity was clear and commendable: to aid members of the community who were experiencing homelessness by providing affordable housing solutions. On paper, the initiative was inspiring. It garnered attention quickly, especially within the local faith-based community. Many people rallied behind the cause, eager to support what seemed like a sincere effort to bring positive change. William's father began attending community events and church meetings, spreading the word and handing out specially designed lottery tickets, which were touted as a creative fundraising mechanism. These tickets were custom printed and sold at gatherings, and the proceeds were promised to go toward building modest, sustainable housing units for those most in need. However, as time went on, optimism began to fade. Despite the significant donations, police would later estimate the total to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. There was no sign of progress. No land was surveyed or purchased, no building permits were filed, and not a single foundation was laid. The public, initially patient and trusting, started to grow uneasy. When concerned donors began asking about updates or outcomes, they were met with vague, often contradictory explanations. At first, William's father claimed there were delays with the city's planning department. Then it was an issue with zoning regulations. Eventually, he stopped responding to inquiries entirely. The nonprofit quietly dissolved, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions, frustrated donors, and deepening suspicion. Adding to the growing unease was another troubling development. Around the same time that his charity efforts unraveled, William's father lost his pastoral credentials. Although the exact reasons for the revocation were never made public, it became one more red flag in a mounting list of controversies surrounding him. For those who had supported him, financially or spiritually, the betrayal felt personal. This period also marked a serious downturn for the family as a whole. Just a few short months before Summer disappeared, Williams' household faced a major financial setback. They were evicted from their home after failing to meet several mortgage payments. Forced to relocate, the family left behind a property filled with belongings and memories, some cherished, others far more painful. It was during this difficult chapter that Summer returned to the house, accompanied by her friend Adam. Her goal was simple: to collect the last of her personal items before they were lost or discarded. Despite the fact that she had once lived there, Summer was deeply uneasy about stepping foot on the property again. Though it now legally belonged to Williams' parents, it remained a place heavy with emotional baggage. Years of tension, control, and manipulation had left scars that were not easily forgotten. Hoping to avoid any conflict, Summer did the responsible thing. She requested a police officer be present while she gathered her things. Adam came along to assist with the physical labor, helping her carry boxes and load the vehicle. But the situation turned volatile almost immediately. Williams' father became visibly hostile the moment he saw Adam. His demeanor changed instantly, his voice rising in anger as he accused Adam of trespassing. Though a uniformed officer was standing by, trying to maintain peace, the elder man's agitation quickly escalated. He shouted accusations, ignored repeated warnings, and continued to challenge the presence of both Summer and Adam. The officer, remaining calm and professional, attempted to mediate. But when Williams' father refused to comply with lawful directives and continued his disruptive behavior, the situation left him no choice. He was arrested at the scene and charged with disorderly conduct. While no one was physically harmed, the incident underscored just how tense and unstable the family dynamic had become. A judge later issued a suspended sentence. This wasn't just another family dispute. It was part of a larger, darker narrative. As investigators dug deeper into Summer's disappearance, they turned their attention to the intricate web of relationships and psychological patterns within Williams' family. They reviewed communication records, financial statements, and, most revealingly, Summer's personal journal, something her parents had found and handed over in a desperate effort to help uncover the truth. The journal entries were illuminating. Written in private, they were emotionally raw and painfully honest. Summer described her life during her marriage to William. She felt isolated and surveilled, with little control over daily decisions. Even basic choices, like what to cook or where to take the children, required William's approval. Over time, her confidence eroded, replaced by a quiet sadness, and eventually, a fierce resolve. One particular entry stood out to detectives. In it, Summer wrote of a turning point. The moment she realized she could no longer endure the environment she was in, and that her children deserved a more peaceful, nurturing life. She acknowledged the overwhelming fear of leaving, but also the deep sense of purpose that guided her choice. Beyond her words, investigators began to piece together more elements of the family's complex emotional history. After William was born, his mother experienced a series of medical complications that left her unable to have more children. Friends and relatives later described how that loss seemed to transform her outlook and behavior. Over time, her attachment to William's children became all-consuming. She often told people in the community that if anything ever happened to William or Summer, she would raise the children herself, not as a guardian, but as their true mother. This level of attachment began to raise red flags. Acting on a series of witness statements and mounting evidence, the police visited William's residence, the home he shared with his parents. One critical piece of information had come from witnesses the night Summer vanished: a description of the getaway car, a white sedan with distinct features. During their visit, detectives noted that a vehicle matching that exact description was parked in the driveway. William, when questioned at the scene, maintained his innocence. He stated that on the night of Summer's disappearance, he and his parents had taken a trip out of town, specifically to Cleveland, roughly 3 hours away, to look at investment properties. He claimed their car broke down during the return trip, forcing them to spend the night and return the next morning. Both of his parents echoed the story, offering identical timelines and accounts of the supposed breakdown. But investigators weren't satisfied. The story felt rehearsed, and with so much at stake, they knew they had to dig deeper. A search warrant was quickly obtained, allowing police to examine both the vehicle and the home more thoroughly. Inside the house, investigators found a portable GPS navigation system. It had not been used in some time, but detectives knew that even powered-off devices often retained historical data. They handed the unit over to forensic specialists, who extracted a detailed log of location points. What they found didn't support William's story. It contradicted it entirely. According to the GPS records, the last location logged before the device was turned off at approximately 5:30 p.m. On the day of Summer's disappearance was not Cleveland, but Logan. More specifically, near the bank where Summer worked. The GPS wasn't turned on again until early the following morning, around 7:30 a.m., and its first recorded location at that time was a local car wash. Surveillance footage from that car wash told investigators even more. Video showed all three family members, William, his mother, and his father, scrubbing the vehicle meticulously. They were seen vacuuming the seats, wiping down the dashboard, and even removing and replacing the tires. The behavior struck detectives as deliberate and overly cautious. By the time law enforcement had reviewed the footage and matched it with the GPS data, 8 critical days had passed since Summer was last seen. With the timeline in place and the Cleveland alibi discredited, investigators brought William and his parents in for questioning. The two men remained firm in their denials. They claimed the GPS must have been malfunctioning and insisted the trip had happened just as they'd said. But when detectives turned to William's mother, something unexpected occurred. Without much prompting, she broke down and began to speak. In a quiet but emotionally loaded voice, she confessed that Summer was no longer alive. She did not provide specific details about how it happened, but what she did share sent a chill through the room. According to her, the family had grown increasingly distraught after the court ruled in Summer's favor regarding custody. Despite repeated attempts to convince her otherwise, Summer had remained firm. She would not allow unsupervised visits, and she no longer trusted William or his parents with the children. In their frustration, the family devised a plan to confront Summer in person. But something went wrong. At some point during the encounter, Summer began to appear physically unwell. William and his father, unprepared and panicked, didn't know what to do. They made no call for help, took no steps to get medical assistance, and instead focused on covering their tracks. In her statement, William's mother described it as a tragic accident, the result of a situation that spiraled out of their control. But to detectives, it was something much more serious. After the incident, William and his parents drove toward the nearest town, a familiar place to them, not just geographically, but emotionally. It was where William's parents had long attended church services, held community events, and maintained ties with friends and congregants. This wasn't just a place on the map, it was a location they felt connected to, and investigators would later question whether the familiarity played into their choice. Nearby, just a few hundred yards from the back of the church property, was an old, disused underground cistern, a large concrete structure originally built decades ago to store runoff water. Over time, it had become a forgotten fixture of the land, surrounded by weeds and partially concealed by a rusting chain-link fence. To someone unfamiliar with the area, it may have gone unnoticed entirely. But to the family, it would have been something they'd seen countless times over the years. It was there, according to William's mother, that they decided to leave Summer. Her claim was that their intention had never been to cause her harm. However, the sequence of events that followed, including the rapid attempt to hide what had occurred, cast serious doubt on that narrative. Investigators found it difficult to believe that a simple confrontation had turned tragic without any premeditation, especially considering the emotional volatility that had been building for months. William's prior threats, many of which had been reported during the custody proceedings, painted a very different picture. He had openly told friends, family members, and even church acquaintances that he would never let someone take his kids away, no matter what a court said. After piecing together the confession with their own leads, law enforcement moved quickly. They arrived at the church grounds and conducted a search of the property. Not long after, they discovered Summer's inside. exactly where William's mother had said she would be. Medical examiners were immediately brought in to assess the condition and determine the cause and time of death. The medical report confirmed much of what the confession described. Summer was no longer seen just 45 minutes after she went missing, a detail that deeply concerned investigators. It indicated there may have been a brief opportunity to intervene. All three family members, William, his father, and his mother, were arrested shortly. The charges were serious: premeditated murder, conspiracy, and obstruction. Their arrests sent a wave of shock through the community. Despite their known tension with Summer, few had expected the situation to escalate to such a devastating level. The legal proceedings began quickly, and yet, not every part of the justice process sat well with the public, particularly the decision to offer a plea bargain to William's mother. In exchange for her confession and for leading investigators to Summer's location, prosecutors agreed to reduce the severity of her charges. She also provided testimony in court, reiterating her version of events and emphasizing that she had not intended for things to turn out the way they did. The court accepted the plea deal, and William's mother, Summer Inman, was sentenced to just 15 years in prison. With good behavior, it's possible she could be released even earlier. A detail that left Summer's family feeling a mix of grief and frustration. To them, the sentence seemed painfully short compared to the lifelong loss they had endured. William Inman and his father, by contrast, were both convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court viewed their involvement as active, premeditated, and central to the events that led to Summer's death. Witness statements, GPS records, surveillance footage, and their repeated lies during questioning all contributed to the decision. In the aftermath of the trial, Summer's 3 children were placed in the care of her parents. The oldest child, who had started school shortly before the tragedy, posed a unique challenge. The story had been widely covered in Logan. It was impossible to shield him entirely from overheard conversations, whispered comments from classmates, or even well-meaning strangers who approached to offer their sympathies. Summer's parents began to worry that the children's last name would forever tie them to a crime they had no part in. They quietly explored the possibility of legally changing their surnames, hoping to give the children a fresh start, free from the weight of association and public scrutiny. As the years passed, Summer's children grew up under the loving, protective care of their maternal grandparents. The family made a conscious decision to remain private, avoiding media attention and public commentary. They moved away from Logan eventually, settling in a different town where the children could have a new beginning. As for William's mother, she remains incarcerated but is scheduled for possible release in 2028. Legal experts have debated whether she will be allowed any contact with her grandchildren after her release. On the quiet morning of October 2nd, 2020, an event unfolded that would leave a lasting scar on everyone who witnessed it. At least 10 individuals saw it happen as it played out in real time. A few managed to fumble for their phones, hands trembling, voices cracking as they tried to explain the unfolding horror to emergency dispatchers. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the attacker turned and sprinted back to a waiting SUV. With a roar of the engine and a squeal of tires, the vehicle sped out of the parking lot, vanishing from sight before anyone could even think about giving chase. Law enforcement officers and paramedics arrived on the scene within minutes of the first calls. But tragically, it was too late. The shock of what had occurred reverberated through the community. Even seasoned detectives and forensic specialists admitted they were rattled. Dear viewers, please don't forget to like, leave a comment under the video, and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new videos. This is very important to us. Alyssa Avery Burkett came into the world on August 18, 1996, in the peaceful and family-oriented suburb of Carrollton, Texas. Situated in the northeastern region of the Lone Star State and falling within the Dallas metropolitan area, Carrollton had long enjoyed a reputation as one of the most desirable places to raise a family in the United States. Known for its excellent schools, low crime rate, and close-knit community, it offered a wholesome backdrop to Alyssa's early years. She was the younger of 2 daughters born to a hard-working middle-class couple who valued family above all else. She was the type of person who sought meaning through experience, introspection, and personal growth. Her family loved her deeply, and though they didn't always understand her artistic inclinations or her spontaneous decision-making, They supported her the best they could. Alyssa was not particularly drawn to academics, and her school records reflected that. She struggled through high school, and though she did eventually graduate, her attempts to pursue higher education were met with rejection and setbacks. Undeterred by these obstacles, Alyssa attempted college again and again, hoping to find her place in a world that often seemed to favor conformity over creativity. However, during her final year, overwhelmed by academic pressures and uncertain about her path, she ultimately decided to withdraw. With bills piling up and no financial safety net to rely on, she took a job as a waitress at a bustling local bar, a decision that marked the beginning of a dramatic new chapter in her life. It was during this phase of transition and self-discovery that Alyssa crossed paths with a man named Andrew Beard. Their meeting was entirely unplanned, occurring one summer evening in 2017 when Andrew stopped by the bar where Alyssa worked. Nearly 10 years her senior, Andrew was an imposing figure, charismatic, self-assured, and clearly affluent. He was the owner of a flourishing power tools company, which had expanded its reach across multiple states. Andrew was instantly captivated by Alyssa's beauty, charm, and uniqueness. Unlike the corporate executives and polished professionals he was used to encountering, Alyssa was refreshingly authentic. He initiated the first conversation, making her laugh with witty remarks and engaging her in thoughtful dialogue. She was flattered by the attention and curious about the confident man who seemed to have everything. Their first date followed quickly, and within weeks, their relationship took off. Alyssa soon found herself swept into a world she had only seen in movies. Fine dining, luxury gifts, spontaneous weekend getaways. Andrew would arrive at the bar in one of his sports cars, waiting to pick her up like a scene out of a romantic novel. At first, Alyssa genuinely believed she had found her fairy tale. The relationship seemed ideal on the surface. Andrew was generous, attentive, and made grand romantic gestures that made her feel special and cherished. Friends and even family members expressed admiration, believing Alyssa had met someone who could give her a stable, comfortable life. But fairy tales, as Alyssa would come to learn, often contain dark turns. As the initial magic began to fade, cracks in the relationship became increasingly evident. What had started as harmless teasing soon escalated into cutting remarks that seemed designed to undermine her confidence. Alongside these criticisms, Andrew's behavior shifted in other ways. Eventually, she made the courageous decision to end things. She was ready to walk away, focus on rebuilding her self-esteem, and start over, until life threw her an unexpected twist. Shortly after the breakup, Alyssa discovered she was pregnant. Her roommate and best friend, Anne, vividly remembered the moment. Alyssa emerged from the bathroom in stunned silence, holding up a positive pregnancy test, her eyes filled with both shocks. She hadn't planned for this. She hadn't even fully processed the end of her relationship with Andrew, and now everything was about to change again. To Alyssa's surprise, Andrew responded to the news with apparent calm and even excitement. He expressed a desire to be involved and offered to support her and the baby. Hopeful that he had changed, Alyssa allowed him back into her life. She returned to college, enrolling in evening classes with the dream of completing her degree and building a future for herself and her child. For a brief period, things seemed better. Andrew was attentive, helped furnish the nursery, and seemed genuinely invested in becoming a father. But this fragile peace didn't last. Within 4 months, old behaviors resurfaced. Andrew's temperament grew unpredictable again, and the atmosphere in the home became increasingly tense. At 7 months pregnant, she made the difficult decision to move back in with her parents. Surrounded by love and support, she finally began to take steps toward securing legal protection for herself and her baby. Determined not to be tied to an unhealthy relationship, Alyssa met with attorneys and began exploring options for sole custody. Her legal team advised her on the challenges ahead, especially considering Andrew's financial advantages and willingness to fight. He saw Alyssa's actions as a betrayal and accused her of being unfit to raise a child. He claimed she lacked discipline, financial stability, and vision, qualities he believed essential for parenthood. On July 23, 2019, under the warm Texas sun, Alyssa Burkett welcomed her daughter into the world. She named her Willow, a name that symbolized both grace and resilience. qualities Alyssa hoped her child would carry throughout life. It was a turning point in every imaginable way. She was now responsible for another human being, one she intended to protect, nurture, and love with every fiber of her being. By the time Willow arrived, Alyssa had accomplished something she once believed was out of reach. She had completed her college degree. Despite the countless challenges, sleepless nights, and a pregnancy that required her to push beyond her physical and emotional limits, she had crossed the finish line. Her perseverance paid off when she secured a job shortly afterward as an executive assistant at a real estate firm. It wasn't glamorous, but the salary was decent, and more importantly, it was enough to support her daughter and begin building a future. Her parents, always her anchors, stepped in to help with Willow. They were more than just babysitters. They were involved grandparents who gave their all to ensure Alyssa could pursue her career without compromising her daughter's care. The early months of motherhood were challenging, but filled with warmth and support from family. Still, a shadow loomed over these precious moments: her ongoing legal battles with Andrew Beard. Andrew, Willow's father, remained relentless in his mission to gain full custody. He painted Alyssa in court as irresponsible and inadequate, despite the many strides she had made. He claimed he could offer a more stable and comfortable life, pointing to his wealth, his multiple business ventures, and his extensive property holdings. Alyssa, on the other hand, represented to him everything he looked down upon: independence he couldn't control and a past he couldn't erase. The courtroom became their battlefield. Andrew used every legal maneuver available, frequently dragging Alyssa to hearings, forcing her to allocate a large portion of her modest salary to legal fees. She often wondered if his motive wasn't rooted in genuine concern for Willow, but rather in a desire to punish her for leaving him. Alyssa made several efforts to find a peaceful solution. She proposed shared custody, suggested co-parenting counseling, and tried to maintain a respectful line of communication. But Andrew refused to compromise. Eventually, a judge established a formal visitation arrangement, granting Andrew weekends with Willow. But even with a court order in place, Andrew wasn't consistent. Sometimes he picked Willow up on time, other times not at all. His moods were unpredictable. When Willow turned 6 months old, things briefly improved. The back-and-forth arguments paused, and for a short while, their interactions were less tense. Andrew even allowed his parents to become involved with their granddaughter. They adored Willow, often doting on her and sending Alyssa thoughtful messages of appreciation. Alyssa dared to believe that a peaceful rhythm had finally been achieved. That illusion shattered in the spring of 2020. In March of that year, Andrew began seeing a woman named Holly Elkins. She was several years older than Alyssa and presented herself as approachable, nurturing, and open to building a positive dynamic for Willow's sake. At first, Holly seemed to have a calming influence on Andrew. For roughly 3 months, both parents abided by the custody arrangement. Pickups and drop-offs went smoothly. There were no courtroom summons or angry voicemails. In mid-April, Holly even reached out to Alyssa via text message, expressing her hope that they could maintain a respectful and supportive relationship for Willow's benefit. The message was warm, even encouraging. Though the two women hadn't spoken much, Alyssa appreciated the gesture and responded in kind. But that sense of balance didn't last long. On May 24th, Andrew was supposed to return Willow after a weekend visit. When the agreed-upon time passed without any word, Alyssa became concerned. After a short delay, Andrew eventually responded, and a minor argument followed. Alyssa, not wanting to create unnecessary drama, decided to let the matter go, believing it was just a misunderstanding. But Andrew, already irritated, responded with harsh words and renewed his demands for full custody. He accused Alyssa of alienating him from his daughter, insisting that weekend visits were no longer acceptable. The calm co-parenting she thought they had achieved disintegrated almost overnight. Andrew, without warning, filed yet another custody suit, pushing once again for sole parental rights. He seemed more determined than ever to exclude Alyssa from Willow's life altogether. But what came next wasn't just another legal twist. It was far more alarming. By early June 2020, Alyssa began to feel like her life was being quietly monitored. It started with small, unnerving observations. She would sense that she was being followed while driving. Cars parked near her apartment lingered longer than seemed normal. At stores or restaurants, she'd catch sight of the same unfamiliar faces. It might have been paranoia, she told herself, but that rationalization didn't hold for long. More disturbing signs followed. Andrew began referencing details of private conversations she had only had with her attorney. He showed up at places she hadn't mentioned visiting. Once, she arrived at her car in a public lot and noticed that the contents inside had been shifted around. Her glove compartment was open, papers scattered, and a child's toy missing from the back seat. Though nothing was stolen, it was clear someone had been inside. Alyssa started double-checking locks, changing passwords, and keeping a detailed journal of every unusual event. She reached out to her attorney, and they discussed filing for additional protective measures. Still, she tried to keep things as normal as possible for Willow, even as the stress took a toll on her sleep, her concentration, and her sense of safety. Then, in early September, a disturbing event shattered what little sense of security she had left. A man named Frank Marrow, someone Alyssa didn't know personally, contacted local law enforcement with a claim. He alleged that Alyssa was involved in distributing illegal products from her vehicle. The accusation was shocking and completely unfounded. When police officers showed up at Alyssa's workplace and asked to accompany her to her vehicle, she cooperated, visibly shaken but compliant. She unlocked the trunk, having no idea what to expect. What she saw nearly made her knees buckle. Inside were neatly stacked bundles of cash, far more than Alyssa had ever seen in her life. She stared in disbelief. The officers began their protocol, reading her rights and escorting her to the station for questioning. Alyssa's heart pounded as she tried to explain she had never seen that money before, that she had no knowledge of how it ended up in her car. The interrogation was intense, though civil. Alyssa repeated over and over that she was innocent. She had no criminal history, no prior offenses, nothing to suggest she was capable of what she was being accused of. The entire situation felt surreal. She began to wonder if someone had planted the money to frame her. Upon thorough investigation by authorities, it was determined that there were no fingerprints, no DNA evidence, and no forensic trace tying Alyssa to the large sum of money discovered in the trunk of her car. Not a single shred of biological or physical evidence linked her to the alleged crime, strongly suggesting that the items had been intentionally planted in a calculated attempt to frame her. After hours of questioning and meticulous examination of the scene, law enforcement had no choice but to release her due to insufficient evidence. However, while Alyssa was cleared in the eyes of the law, her personal life and sense of safety had been permanently altered. She felt certain that someone was tracking her movements, listening to her conversations, and monitoring her from the shadows. Although she took steps to secure her digital life, running anti-spyware scans on her phone and computer, resetting passwords, even having her devices checked by professionals, nothing turned up. There was no trace of spyware or any breach. Yet, her unease only grew stronger. For the next 4 months, Alyssa lived under a constant veil of fear. She was alert to every car that followed too closely, every stranger who lingered a little too long nearby. Her once peaceful life had turned into a hyper-vigilant existence where trust was scarce and safety felt like a luxury. Then came the morning of October 2nd, 2020. It was a Friday. The sky was clear, the air crisp with early signs of fall. As usual, Alyssa arrived at the office complex where she worked. She parked her car in her designated spot in the lot, just a few feet away from the building's main entrance. Everything seemed routine, until it wasn't. She was gathering her things, preparing to exit the vehicle, when she noticed a large black SUV, a Ford Expedition, parked just a few spaces away. The windows were heavily tinted, making it impossible to see inside. The vehicle looked unfamiliar, but Alyssa didn't initially think much of it. Her job was in a busy area. Cars came and went all day. But just moments later, her instinct told her something was off. A figure stepped out from the SUV. The man, described by later witnesses, had a beard and was wearing all black. His clothing was deliberately nondescript, with a hood pulled up to shield his identity. The way he moved, calm, purposeful, and without hesitation, sent a chill down the spines of those who observed from a distance. Without saying a word, he walked directly to the front of Alyssa's car. What happened next was swift. At least 10 people, including office workers looking out from nearby windows, witnessed the scene unfold in real time. Shocked and immobilized by fear, none of them could act fast enough to intervene. Several scrambled to dial emergency services, their hands shaking as they described what was happening. The entire event lasted only a matter of minutes before the assailant turned and rushed back to the SUV. The vehicle peeled out of the lot at high speed, disappearing before anyone could react. Law enforcement officers and paramedics arrived on the scene within minutes of the first calls. But tragically, it was too late. The shock of what had occurred reverberated through the community. Even seasoned detectives and forensic specialists admitted they were rattled. Many said it was one of the most unsettling crime scenes they had ever encountered. The nature of the assault, its timing, location, and precision, left no doubt that it had been carefully premeditated. There was no indication that the perpetrator intended to rob or frighten her. The actions had been focused and deliberate. It was clear to investigators that the motive behind the crime was deeply personal. Within moments of the emergency response, Alyssa's family arrived at the scene. Her co-workers, in their panic, had called her parents immediately after the attack. The image of Alyssa's mother collapsing to the ground at the sight of the flashing lights and police tape would stay etched in the memories of those present that day. Her family was devastated. When detectives asked if there was anyone who could have had a motive to harm Alyssa, her parents didn't pause. Without hesitation, they named the one person they believed capable of orchestrating such an act: her ex-partner and the father of her child, Andrew Beard. They also revealed that the day before the incident, Andrew and his partner, Holly Elkins, had taken Willow for a scheduled visit. The timing now seemed far too convenient. Fearing that Andrew might try to flee the area, authorities issued an urgent statewide alert. Patrol units, air surveillance, and border checks were alerted to be on the lookout for Andrew's vehicle. Within hours, law enforcement located Andrew, Holly, and Willow traveling in a car along a route heading toward Andrew's residence. The couple did not resist when pulled over. They appeared cooperative and composed, answering every question presented by the officers. According to those involved in the initial questioning, both Andrew and Holly showed no signs of panic or distress. They expressed genuine surprise about the tragic news and willingly agreed to accompany police to the station for further questioning. A preliminary search of Andrew's vehicle turned up nothing out of the ordinary. No weapon, no traces of evidence, no clothing matching the suspect description. Despite mounting pressure and outrage from Alyssa's family, authorities had no grounds for detention. Andrew hadn't violated any legal agreement regarding custody or court orders, so he was released. However, the case was far from over. Later that day, a search warrant was issued for Andrew's home. Detectives, forensic analysts, and crime scene technicians arrived at the residence, carefully documenting and collecting items. Though he was not arrested, Andrew, along with Holly and Willow, checked into a nearby hotel while the search commenced. The discoveries inside the home gave investigators reason to look closer. Multiple legally owned firearms were located inside the home, all of them properly registered. However, none matched the specific type believed to have been used in the attack. That said, a firearm suppressor, or silencer, was found that did not correspond to any of the registered weapons. In the garage, they uncovered a sheath for a large hunting knife. Although it couldn't be conclusively tied to the weapon used, its presence raised serious questions. The most potentially incriminating find came from Andrew's personal computer. During a forensic analysis of digital evidence collected from Andrew Beard's personal computer and electronic devices, detectives made a chilling discovery that corroborated Alyssa's earlier fears and suspicions. Installed on his systems were sophisticated spyware programs, high-grade surveillance tools typically used in corporate espionage. These applications were capable of silently intercepting phone calls, reading text messages, and recording Alyssa's private conversations without detection. Another program monitored GPS data in real time, allowing someone with access to her phone to track her location at any given moment. The situation became even more alarming when a detailed technical breakdown revealed that Alyssa's car had been equipped with a covert GPS tracking device. It had been expertly installed in a concealed area under the vehicle, giving Andrew constant access to her whereabouts without her ever knowing. The digital footprint left behind was clear. He had known exactly where she was going, who she was meeting, and when she was alone. Investigators concluded that this level of coordination could only be achieved by someone with obsessive intent and significant resources. The digital trail didn't stop there. Further investigation uncovered a previously hidden connection between Andrew Beard and Frank Marrow, the same man who had made the false police report accusing Alyssa of illegal activity just weeks prior. Evidence showed that Andrew had provided Marrow with specific instructions, a duplicate keyless entry device, and a financial incentive to carry out a carefully staged operation. Bank statements revealed a large, unexplained withdrawal from Andrew's account days before the incident. The money was traced to Marrow through a series of digital transfers. In essence, Andrew had attempted to orchestrate a framing operation, hoping that a criminal charge would strip Alyssa of custody and hand him full parental control of Willow. With these revelations, authorities finally had enough to take legal action. While there still wasn't direct evidence tying Andrew to Alyssa's murder, the charges related to illegal surveillance, stalking, and conspiracy to commit custodial interference were strong enough to warrant his arrest. On those grounds, Andrew Beard was taken into custody. However, due to the nature of the charges and lack of concrete evidence linking him to the more serious crime, he was released on bail the following day under strict conditions. A travel restriction order was imposed, forbidding him from leaving the state, and he was required to check in regularly with law enforcement. Despite this, Andrew returned to the home he shared with Holly Elkins and Willow, continuing life almost as if nothing had changed. But the case was far from over. On October 4th, a breakthrough came. A black SUV matching the description given by witnesses, the same vehicle used during the attack, was discovered abandoned in a remote wooded area miles outside the city limits. The vehicle, a Ford Expedition, had been thoroughly wiped down, but forensic investigators quickly found what they needed. The VIN number confirmed it had been rented a day before the murder under a fabricated identity using high-quality forged documents. Inside the SUV, the forensics team found more than just Alyssa's DNA traces. A bottle of dark-toned foundation makeup was discovered in the back seat, along with a synthetic black beard that appeared to have been hastily discarded. The false beard had visible makeup smudges and adhesive residue. When the beard was sent for analysis, DNA testing delivered a decisive result. It matched Andrew Beard. The disguise had been used in the commission of the crime, and it tied him directly to the scene. The evidence was now overwhelming. On the strength of this discovery, Andrew was rearrested and charged with first-degree murder. The same day, emergency legal action was taken to transfer custody of Willow to Alyssa's parents, who had petitioned the court after learning of Andrew's arrest. A temporary protective custody order was granted, ensuring Willow's safety while the legal system determined her long-term placement. The reaction among Andrew's circle was one of disbelief. To many who knew him casually, he was seen as a successful businessman and a doting father. He had no known history of violent behavior. But as details of the case emerged, friends and even family members began to reflect on subtle signs. Episodes of possessiveness. Some who had once defended Andrew began to reconsider what they truly knew about him. Even his own mother admitted in an emotional interview that she had noticed his obsession with gaining sole custody of Willow had crossed a concerning line. Holly Elkins, Andrew's fiancée, publicly expressed disbelief in the charges. She insisted that Andrew was innocent and stood by him during the early phase of the investigation. When questioned by detectives, she denied having any involvement in the murder, refused to testify against Andrew, and stated she would not cooperate with the prosecution. With no direct evidence linking her to the crime, Holly was released from custody and placed under observation, though she remained a person of interest. As the case moved forward, Andrew maintained his innocence. He offered an alibi for the morning of the attack, but under scrutiny, his timeline fell apart. Surveillance footage contradicted his claims, and phone records suggested he was near the scene at the time of the crime. With mounting evidence and the likelihood of a lengthy trial looming, Andrew's legal options grew narrower by the day. Then, after spending nearly 19 months in county jail awaiting trial, Andrew unexpectedly requested another interview with investigators. This time, he came prepared to speak without legal counsel. In a calm but chilling confession, Andrew finally admitted to his role in the crime. He detailed his actions from the very beginning, walking investigators through the surveillance and the final act. But in a twist that shocked even seasoned detectives, Andrew claimed he had not acted alone. According to his confession, it was Holly who had masterminded the plan. He described Holly as intelligent, persuasive, and quietly manipulative. She had a way of blending charm with subtle control. While to the outside world she appeared warm and nurturing, Andrew painted a different picture. He alleged that Holly's inability to have children of her own had deeply affected her emotionally. Over time, she became fixated on Willow, seeing the child as her own. When she realized that Alyssa's presence threatened that fantasy, Andrew claimed she began crafting a strategy. Holly allegedly aimed to have Alyssa declared unfit, using fabricated charges to have her imprisoned. However, there was another complication. Alyssa's parents, who could also petition for custody of their granddaughter. It was a calm afternoon when Andrew and Holly Elkins arrived at the home of Alyssa's parents to pick up Willow for a scheduled visitation. What should have been a routine exchange quickly spiraled into tension. According to witnesses, Holly appeared agitated even before entering the property, displaying signs of hostility and restlessness. As soon as the door opened, Holly reportedly began raising her voice, accusing Alyssa's parents of intentionally poisoning Willow against her and Andrew. Her tone, sharp and accusing, escalated the atmosphere from tense to volatile in a matter of moments. The situation turned confrontational, and within minutes, Holly accused Willow's grandparents of attacking her. Immediately after leaving the house, she called 911, claiming that she feared for her life. When law enforcement arrived, Holly appeared visibly shaken. However, after conducting initial interviews with all parties and examining the physical evidence, officers noted inconsistencies between Holly's account. Officers concluded that while an argument had clearly taken place, there was no evidence to suggest that Holly had been attacked or that she had been in any danger. The matter was formally documented, but no charges were filed. This event, however, wasn't an isolated incident. It was one more calculated move in a broader campaign orchestrated by Holly Elkins. Authorities would later learn that Holly had been the mastermind behind an earlier scheme to frame Alyssa. Her thinking was cold and strategic. If Alyssa were imprisoned, Andrew would automatically gain full custody of Willow. But when that plan collapsed due to a lack of evidence and Alyssa's name was cleared, Holly began exploring far more sinister options. As Andrew grew more influenced by Holly's psychological manipulation, she began crafting a detailed and elaborate plan. She reserved a rental vehicle using forged documents and a fake identity. She gathered materials, makeup, prosthetic disguise elements, and a synthetic beard to alter Andrew's appearance. She rehearsed the timing and logistics, covering every potential variable. The plan, in her mind, was perfect. She was convinced that the disguise, paired with Andrew's clean criminal record, would mislead investigators long enough to destroy any possible link between them and the crime. However, despite her meticulous planning, Andrew made critical errors. His inexperience with crime and his emotional volatility led to mistakes, discarded items, overlooked surveillance footage, and forensic traces that quickly unraveled their carefully woven narrative. In May 2023, after nearly 3 years of legal back and forth and a grueling investigation, Andrew Beard stood before a judge and jury. Following his detailed confession, he was convicted of first-degree murder. The court sentenced him to 43 years in prison. Under Texas law, he would be required to serve a minimum of 30 years before becoming eligible for parole, a reality that would keep him behind bars for the majority of his life. Meanwhile, Holly Elkins made a strategic move. Just 2 weeks after Andrew's conviction, she quietly relocated to Michigan. She purchased a modest apartment in a small suburban town and began living under the radar. She refrained from using social media, kept a low profile, and cut off contact with almost everyone who knew about her past. For nearly 2 years, Holly lived in near anonymity, convinced that she had successfully distanced herself from the events in Texas and evaded prosecution. But Holly's sense of safety was short-lived. One quiet morning, as she prepared to leave her apartment, police officers appeared at her doorstep. Without drama or resistance, they placed her in handcuffs and informed her she was being taken into custody. Holly initially appeared calm, maintaining her innocence and claiming she had been a victim of Andrew's manipulation, not an accomplice. She asserted that she had no role in planning the crime and that her only mistake was remaining silent out of fear for her own safety. However, that version of events quickly fell apart when forensic experts presented digital evidence retrieved from her personal devices. Messages, voice notes, and encrypted emails between her and Andrew showed not only her awareness of the plan, but her active involvement in organizing it. In August 2024, Holly Elkins faced her own reckoning in court. The trial drew national attention. After several days of deliberation, the jury found her guilty on multiple charges: incitement to commit murder, conspiracy, aiding and destruction of evidence. She was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. While working in a vast cornfield on the rural outskirts of town, a farm laborer was tending to the crops when he stumbled upon something that made him freeze in shock. Not far from where, investigators later discovered a black jacket, abandoned on the ground. Just a few days after this grim discovery, authorities located Delene Carlson's bag, discarded nearly 6 miles away from the cornfield, seemingly left behind to hide any link to the crime scene. What had initially been treated as a heartbreaking missing person case had now taken a tragic turn into a full-scale homicide investigation. The focus shifted. It was no longer a question of what had happened to Delene, but rather who was responsible for this and why they had done it. Dear viewers, please don't forget to like, leave a comment under the video, and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new videos. This is very important to us. Delene Janice Carlson entered the world on February 22, 1988, in the sunlit state of California. Though born on the West Coast, her heart and formative years belonged to the peaceful, picturesque town of Sandpoint, Idaho. Nestled among lush pine forests and near the shores of Lake Pandorela, Sandpoint was a close-knit community where everyone knew their neighbors, and childhoods were often filled with the simplicity of outdoor adventure and shared values. Delene thrived in this environment. Even as a little girl, she displayed a warm, outgoing nature. Friends and teachers alike remembered her as a cheerful, kind-hearted young woman who always seemed to go out of her way to lend a hand, especially when it came to younger children. Her interest in caregiving began early, and by the time she was in her teens, she already knew that her life's purpose would involve working with and helping kids. Delene completed her studies at Sandpoint High School in 2006, leaving behind a trail of glowing memories and heartfelt goodbyes. After high school, she began working in the service industry, taking on roles in several local cafes and restaurants. Whether she was serving coffee, clearing tables, or chatting with customers, Delene earned a solid reputation for being both diligent and personable. Her work ethic was unmatched, and her ability to connect with people made her a favorite among coworkers and regulars alike. She never treated it as just a job. For her, it was a stepping stone towards something bigger. In the summer of 2011, fueled by ambition and the hope of a brighter future, Delene made the significant decision to move back to California, specifically to the city of Stockton. She would be living with her Aunt Maggie, and the move marked a new chapter in her life. The relocation wasn't just about a change in scenery. It was a strategic leap toward her long-held dream. After saving for years from her waitressing jobs and budgeting meticulously, Delene had enrolled at San Joaquin Delta College with plans to major in child development. It was a dream she'd been working toward for a long time. She envisioned a life spent making a difference, one where she could support and nurture the growth of children in need of care and guidance. With only a few months left before the semester started, Delene focused on adjusting to her new surroundings and establishing a social circle in Stockton. Her cousin Cecily was instrumental in this transition, serving as her personal tour guide, showing her the best spots in town, introducing her to people, and helping her feel at home. Delene, with her usual confidence and charm, quickly began to make new friends. One local hangout spot quickly became her favorite, a casual nightlife venue called Bar and Grill. With its relaxed vibe and friendly crowd, it was the perfect place for someone like her to unwind and socialize. On the evening of August 6, 2011, Delene decided to head out alone for the night. Cecily, who was battling a fever, opted to stay home. But Delene, ever the independent spirit, didn't want to miss out on an evening she'd looked forward to. Dressed in her favorite black and white vest top paired with stylish ripped blue jeans, she got ready for the night. Before she left, she asked Cecily to take a quick photo of her outfit. A simple act, but one that would later become crucial. As she left, her Aunt Maggie reminded her with a light-hearted but firm tone to be back no later than 3 a.m. Delene smiled, acknowledged the curfew, and headed into the warm Stockton night. But 3 a.m. would come and go without the sound of the front door unlocking. Then 3:30 passed. Then 4. Maggie, still awake and worried, began texting Delene repeatedly, hoping for a reply. Hoping perhaps she had decided to sleep over at a friend's house. She tried to rest but couldn't. Restlessness set in, and a gnawing sense of unease began to grow. As dawn broke, Maggie reached out to Delene's friends, trying to piece together her movements the night before. But no one had seen or heard from her since she left for the bar and grill. With anxiety mounting and no sign of Delene, Maggie made the difficult call to local authorities. Although it was still within the early hours, too soon for an official missing person report by some standards, the police took down the information. Meanwhile, family and friends mobilized. They searched streets, parks, and neighborhoods, calling out her name and clinging to hope. But as the heat of the day gave way to the cool hush of night once more, that hope began to fray. The following morning, police began their formal investigation. The photo Delene had asked Cecily to take, the one that captured her outfit before she left, became a vital lead. Officers used the image to canvass local businesses and residents. Their first stop was the bar and grill. A manager there remembered Delene. She had been a regular, friendly, sociable, the kind of patron who made an impression. He recalled her spending much of the evening outside, chatting and enjoying the night air. Nothing had seemed particularly strange, but one detail stood out. Delene had arrived with a friend, but had also bumped into someone from her past, Jacob Evangelisti, her 25-year-old on-and-off boyfriend. According to Jacob, their relationship had been rocky of late. In fact, he openly admitted they had had a major disagreement just 4 days earlier. He had learned Delene had been speaking with James Cousins, a mutual acquaintance, and tensions had flared. Jacob told officers that despite their strained dynamic, they had both spent time at the bar that night, though somewhat apart. He said they hung out with mutual friends but kept their distance emotionally. At some point, Delene told him she wanted to end things for good. While Jacob said he was hurt and wanted to reconcile, Delene seemed resolute. According to Jacob, she left the bar before he did, and he did not see who, if anyone, she left with. His timeline aligned with what employees remembered, but authorities still had their doubts. Both Jacob Evangelisti and James Cousins were labeled persons of interest, not suspects, but individuals worth further attention. As law enforcement reviewed footage from the security cameras at the venue that Delene Carlson had visited that night, they began piecing together a fragmented timeline. The recordings clearly captured her standing outside the building for an extended period, casually smoking a cigarette and interacting with other patrons. At approximately 1 a.m., she was seen re-entering the building. Although there were still a number of people milling about, the mood was beginning to wind down as the evening stretched deeper into the early morning hours. One particularly notable moment captured on camera showed a man briefly putting his arm around Delene. That man was identified as 25-year-old Jason Gilly, someone who, like many others in her social circle, was considered a mutual friend. Jason's connection to Delene wasn't just casual. He lived with James Cousins, the same James whom Delene had reportedly been speaking with recently, the same James who had once caused tension between her and her former boyfriend, Jacob Evangelisti. Shortly after that brief interaction, Delene headed back outside, where she was spotted having a heated conversation with Jacob. Surveillance footage depicted her as visibly animated, gesturing emphatically with her hands, clearly passionate and possibly upset. This interaction seemed to align with Jacob's prior statement to the authorities, in which he mentioned that they had exchanged strong words that night, continuing to hash out unresolved issues between them. After this confrontation, Delene went back inside alone, while Jacob remained outside, smoking a cigarette and talking to a friend. When the clock struck 3 a.m., the venue officially closed for the night. People trickled out, the staff wrapped up for the evening, and the lights dimmed. Yet curiously, there was no surveillance footage showing Delene leaving. The same went for Jacob. Both had somehow exited the building undetected, either through a blind spot or perhaps a back exit not covered by cameras. Their movements were unaccounted for during that crucial window, leaving investigators puzzled. What began to emerge next were the final digital breadcrumbs from Delene herself. Jacob told police that not long after the venue closed, he had received multiple calls from her. 12, to be exact. In one of those brief phone calls, he could hear a man's voice in the background. Delene, in a casual tone, mentioned that she was drinking at Jason Gilley's house. This detail raised eyebrows because Jason had previously stated that he had left her at the bar hours earlier. In an early morning text, Delene asked Jacob if she could come over to his house later, and he agreed. However, after that message, communication ceased entirely. Jacob eventually fell asleep and awoke to silence. No missed calls, no new messages. Just an unsettling quiet. With this new information, the investigation turned toward Jason Gilley and James Cousins. Detectives wanted to speak with them directly. Jason shared a home with his mother and grandmother in Stockton, and James Cousins was also temporarily residing there. When questioned, James was calm and cooperative. He acknowledged that he and Delene had been talking, but clarified that their connection wasn't romantic or exclusive. He also provided solid proof that he had been out of town on a trip during the time of Delene's disappearance. This alibi was corroborated by multiple credible sources, effectively removing him from the immediate list of suspects. Jason's statements, however, raised more questions than they answered. He initially told investigators that after briefly encountering Delene at the bar, he had offered to give her a ride home, but had to leave alone at around 1 a.m. because his grandmother had contacted him, urgently requesting his return. She had told him that his young son was unwell, and he needed to come home. According to his grandmother, Jason did indeed arrive home by approximately 1:30 a.m., but Jacob's version of events contradicted Jason's. Delene had told Jacob that she was at Jason's place drinking. Who was telling the truth? To make matters even more complex, Jason pointed detectives back toward Jacob, emphasizing the intense argument he had witnessed between the two earlier that night. Jason described the disagreement as volatile, suggesting that it might have escalated further after they left the bar. Meanwhile, the community was rallying in full force. Delene's family and friends worked tirelessly, refusing to stand still while answers remained elusive. They managed to raise $1,000 to add to the $1,000 reward already offered by Crime Stoppers. A semi-professional football team in the area volunteered to host a charity match and a raffle to raise additional funds. Volunteers handed out missing person flyers in shopping centers, parking lots, and neighborhoods. They organized search efforts and continued pushing her story on social media. The pain of not knowing began to eat away at them. As one of her close friends said during a local news interview, having to talk your brain out of every single possible scenario is exhausting and terrifying. The constant guessing, trying to connect dots that may not even be there, it consumes you. The uncertainty becomes a shadow over everything. As time passed and no solid leads emerged, investigators expanded their efforts. They visited every nearby business, asking for access to any camera footage, no matter how minor. It was a time-consuming process. The constant guessing, trying to connect dots that may not even be there, it consumes you. The uncertainty becomes a shadow over everything. As time passed and no solid leads emerged, investigators expanded their efforts. They visited every nearby business, asking for access to any camera footage, no matter how minor. It was a time-consuming process, but it finally paid off. At approximately 1:30 a.m., a 24-hour convenience store called Food 4 Less yielded a breakthrough. On their security feed, police saw Delene enter the store alongside none other than Jason Gilley. The two were casually browsing before purchasing alcohol. This revelation directly contradicted Jason's earlier statement that he had parted ways with Delene at the bar and hadn't seen her again afterward. This was a significant moment in the investigation. With this discrepancy in hand, detectives brought Jason in for a second round of questioning. They approached it calmly but directly, giving him the opportunity to clarify his story. "What time did you say you got home again?" one officer asked. About 1:20, maybe 1:30, Jason replied, sticking to his original timeline. Then, without missing a beat, the officer showed him the surveillance footage. There was Jason, clear as day, at the store with Delene at 1:30 a.m. He blinked, clearly taken aback. "We know a lot more of what's going on right now," the officer said gently but firmly. Jason hesitated. "Okay, wait a minute. Wait, he stammered. "I left the bar with Delene to go to Food for Less." Now backtracking, Jason said he had forgotten that detail. He explained that after buying the alcohol, he dropped Delene back off at Finnegan's, a nearby location where people often met up after bar hours. This sudden shift in his story did not go unnoticed. As the interrogation with Jason Gilley progressed, investigators could sense that something in his demeanor was beginning to shift. The inconsistencies in his story were becoming harder to explain away, and his confidence appeared to falter under the weight of the mounting questions. Detectives, drawing on years of experience, recognized the subtle indicators, the hesitant glances, the shaking hands, the voice that cracked ever so slightly. Jason was unraveling, and they were determined to get to the truth. "Jason," one of the detectives said, gently but firmly, "let's try to make this better. Right here, right now. You know what happened. You were there." Jason's eyes welled up. Tears gathered along the edge of his lashes as he finally began to open up more than he had in previous interviews. His voice trembled. "We hung out for a little bit more after we got back to my place," he said. "Then she got upset. She wanted to go home." He admitted to police for the first time that after leaving the bar and stopping at the store, they had in fact gone to his house together. But he claimed things took a turn shortly afterward. According to Jason, Delene became upset during their time at his home. He didn't elaborate on the reason for her frustration. He said she made the decision to leave, choosing to walk home rather than stay any longer. Jason then told investigators that he followed her in his car, trying to convince her to get in. Eventually, she accepted the ride. But what happened next would only deepen the mystery. Jason claimed he didn't drive her home. Instead, he said Delene had asked to be dropped off somewhere different, 40 miles south of where they had started. He couldn't give a specific reason for the odd request, only that she insisted. According to him, after dropping her off, he drove to get gas. He described feeling deeply unsettled afterward, racked with regret, anxiety, and guilt. He knew he had made a series of poor decisions, and the longer time passed with no word from Delene, the more unbearable it became. He admitted that he lied during his initial questioning because he was scared and confused. Detectives, listening carefully, grew increasingly uneasy. They were experienced enough to know when someone was skirting around the truth. Jason's story had changed too many times. It had new holes now, not fewer. And in their collective gut, they believed the case had taken a tragic turn. One of the officers leaned in. "Jason, we need to find her. Where are we going to find her?" he asked quietly. "Help us. Her family deserves answers. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about her." Just as it seemed Jason might say more, just as the tension in the room reached its peak, he broke eye contact. "I think I need a lawyer," he said softly. At that moment, the interview stopped cold. With no confession and no physical evidence tying Jason definitively to a crime, officers made a difficult but necessary step. Jason Gilley, 25, was arrested on suspicion of kidnapping. Investigators had pushed as far as the law would allow, but for now, it wasn't enough. The district attorney's office reviewed the evidence and concluded that while Jason's actions were troubling, there wasn't enough to press formal charges that could hold in court. Within 48 hours, he was released from custody. Outside the station, reporters waited, hoping for answers. Jason's family stood by him. His mother passionately defended him to anyone who would listen. She insisted her son was innocent, that Delene had been at the house but left of her own free will on Sunday morning. Once again, a story directly contradicted Jason's earlier claims, another inconsistency in a growing stack. The public pressure mounted. Jason was now the sole person of interest in Delene's disappearance. Yet he walked free. The community was rattled, and the family was heartbroken. The lead prosecutor addressed the press candidly. "It doesn't matter how strong your instincts are. It matters what you can prove. And right now, we can't prove enough." Despite the lack of charges, the investigation pressed forward. Jason maintained that he had simply been caught in a bad situation and that he was not, as he put it, a bad guy. But then came another discovery. This one caught on camera. Surveillance footage from a convenience store showed Jason arriving at the gas station around 11 a.m., the morning after Delene disappeared. He was seen at the pump, topping off his gas tank. But something else stood out. As the footage was digitally enhanced, investigators noticed Jason appeared to be wiping down his arms and the front of his shirt. On closer inspection, his clothes and skin looked smudged, covered in what appeared to be dirt. Why was he so dirty? Where had he been? This led police to shift their focus to a specific area not far from Jason's home, an overgrown, heavily wooded stretch along the Calaveras River. The riverbank was known locally for illegal dumping and abandoned items, a forgotten place overgrown with brush and thick with mud. It was also just a short distance from the University of the Pacific, and even closer to the grocery store where Delene had last been seen on camera. That put it just blocks from Jason's house. Soon, search teams combed through the Calaveras River area. They waded through tall weeds, dense thickets, and shallow, muddy water. Police divers joined in. The air was heavy with hope and dread. They weren't just looking for clues. They were preparing for the possibility of something more final. Delene Carlson had now been missing for over a week and a half. She had vanished in the early hours of August 7th, and not a single confirmed sighting had occurred since. When local media asked why police were focusing on the river area, investigators declined to specify. But the implications were clear. This was no longer just a missing person search. It was turning into a recovery effort. Court documents soon revealed more about what investigators had pieced together. According to the reports, Jason Gilley had lied repeatedly, first claiming he hadn't been with Delene at all that night. But Delene's ex-boyfriend, Jacob Evangelisti, told police that at 5 a.m. that Sunday morning, he received a text message from Delene. She told him she was at Jason's house but would be leaving soon. It would be the last message Jacob ever received from her. Later, Jason would change his story once more, this time claiming that Delene had come over to his house, and the two had been intimate before getting into an argument. He said he then drove her south, about 40 minutes away, before letting her out of the car. Again, he claimed it had been her choice. A final chilling detail came to light. Delene's phone had remained active after that encounter. At 11:25 a.m. on Sunday, Jason's roommate received a strange text message from her phone. It said that Delene was somewhere on Country Club Boulevard, a busy thoroughfare near central Stockton, and that her phone battery was dying. But by the time the message was received, Delene was already missing, and the phone would soon go silent forever. As the investigation into Delene Carlson's disappearance entered its 7th week, tension was mounting, and time felt like both a relentless enemy and a fading ally. Detectives continued to comb through digital footprints, interview acquaintances, and recheck areas that had already been searched. Among the many leads they pursued, one particular strand continued to pull at them: messages that had been sent from Delene's phone after she was last seen. When questioned about these messages, James Cousins, one of the mutual friends entangled in the case, told investigators something that sent chills down their spines. "I don't even know if it was Delene sending them. All I can say is they were coming from her phone." He elaborated further, stating, "Texts are just that, words on a screen. But who's really behind them? That's the question. That phone could have been in anyone's hands at that point." This uncertainty cast a long shadow over what might otherwise have been seen as hopeful signs. What if those messages, far from being reassurance, were misdirection? Then came a discovery that shifted the investigation once again. On August 18, search teams scouring the murky terrain around the Calaveras River came across a single flip-flop sandal lodged in the riverbank's underbrush. It was waterlogged and worn, but bore a strong resemblance to a pair Delene had been wearing around the time of her disappearance. While it wasn't definitive proof of anything, it suggested that she may have ended up in that very area, one already thick with suspicion due to its proximity to Jason Gilley's home. Weeks passed, and the search continued with heavy hearts and diminishing hope. Then came the moment that would change everything. Roughly 2 months after Delene was last seen, a farm worker tending to crops in a vast cornfield on the rural outskirts of town stumbled upon something that stopped him in his tracks. Nearby, investigators later found a black jacket, and just a few days after that, Delene's bag was discovered, some 6 miles away from the cornfield, discarded as if to obscure its connection. What had started as a heartbreaking missing persons case had now turned into a full-fledged homicide investigation. The question was no longer what happened to Delene Carlson. It was who had done this, and why. The evidence was officially identified through dental records. For Delene's loved ones, this confirmation, while bringing some closure, shattered any lingering sliver of hope. "I just couldn't believe it," one family friend said tearfully. "I really thought she'd turn up. Maybe scared, maybe needing help, but alive. I'm glad the family has answers now, but I wish with all my heart it didn't end like this." As detectives pored over the growing pile of evidence, the inconsistencies in Jason Gilley's story became impossible to ignore. Despite his grandmother's initial defense of his alibi, under further questioning, she eventually admitted that she had lied to protect him. And she wasn't the only one keeping secrets. Another person close to Jason came forward and told investigators that Jason owned a firearm, a detail he had never disclosed. Ballistics experts analyzed shell casings found near the crime scene and made a grim confirmation. They matched the gun registered to Jason Gilley. Adding to the growing mountain of evidence was cell tower data, which placed Jason and Delene in the same area near the time of her disappearance. This, along with the suspicious messages sent from Delene's phone after she was presumed dead, led investigators to conclude that Jason had been using her phone to create a false timeline, possibly to mislead Jacob Evangelisti and others who might have gone looking for her. Delene's aunt, heartbroken and visibly shaken, summed it up in words that resonated with everyone who knew her niece. "I don't understand why someone would do that to a person like her. Delene just wanted to be liked. She was kind. She loved people. She had this magnetic personality. She drew people in." Further forensic analysis of Jason's phone revealed that, contrary to his initial statements, he had been contacting Delene far more frequently than he had ever admitted. In a single 3-day period leading up to her disappearance, over 200 text messages had been sent from his phone to hers. The tone of those messages ranged from friendly to insistent, even obsessive. According to friends, Delene had begun brushing them off, trying to keep things light, even laughing off some of his more persistent texts. But others said she had started to express discomfort. She wasn't interested in Jason in that way. According to the prosecution, the timeline looked increasingly sinister. Jason allegedly persuaded Delene to go to his house under the pretense of hanging out or offering her a ride home. Once there, something happened. Prosecutors believed he had become angry when it became clear she wasn't romantically interested in him. In court, the case against Jason Gilley continued to grow stronger. Authorities now had more than 1,000 pages of documented evidence. And that wasn't even counting the full set of phone and digital records still being processed. He was formally charged with the kidnapping and murder of Delene Carlson. At his preliminary hearing, which lasted multiple days, witnesses testified, and evidence was presented in painstaking detail. By the second day, the judge faced the heavy responsibility of deciding whether the evidence was sufficient to proceed to trial. With the weight of the case and the volume of contradictions in Jason's statements, few doubted the direction the ruling would take. Because the crime involved special circumstances, namely kidnapping in connection with homicide, Jason became eligible under California law for capital punishment. However, due to ongoing legal challenges to the death penalty, including the case of Michael Morales in 2006, the district attorney's office announced they would not seek the death penalty. Instead, they would pursue life in prison without the possibility of parole, emphasizing the deliberate nature of the act and its devastating impact on Delene's family and community. Those who had once stood by Jason began to turn away. One of the most telling moments came from his former best friend, Robert Cousin, who had once sheltered him when media pressure grew unbearable. "When it was bad, I let him stay with me. Everyone gave him the benefit of the doubt because of how convinced he was that he had nothing to do with it," Robert told reporters. "But now that I know what he did, what he's accused of doing to that girl, I've completely cut him out of my life. She was 23. She was full of life. She didn't deserve any of this. I don't feel bad for him. Not for him, not for his family, and not for anyone who helped cover for him. I sat him down one night, the friend later recalled, and I just asked him outright, "Did you have anything to do with it? Do you know what happened to her?" The room was still, the air tense. Jason's answer, delivered with a calm demeanor that made the words even more chilling, was simple. "No, I don't know what happened to her." But as months turned into years and the mountain of evidence grew higher, that answer no longer held the weight it once did. More than 2 years after the day Delene vanished, the wheels of justice finally turned toward resolution. Jason Gilley, now 27 years old, was transferred out of protective custody and placed into the general inmate population at the county detention facility. He was no longer just a suspect under watch. He was now a defendant standing trial in one of the most deeply felt murder cases Stockton had seen in years. The lead-up to the trial had been long and complicated. Throughout the course of the investigation, Jason had given investigators multiple conflicting statements, each slightly different from the last. But when the courtroom filled with jurors, legal teams, reporters, and grieving family members, the prosecution began laying out the carefully constructed framework of evidence that told a far different story. It was a story rooted in phone records, forensic analysis, surveillance footage, and above all, behavior patterns that pointed to a chilling conclusion. As the prosecution made its closing arguments, they painted a picture of a man who had become increasingly obsessive. They noted the over 200 text messages Jason had sent her in just 3 days, many of which Delene had ignored or politely deflected. And they reminded the jury of the forensic evidence. Dirt-covered clothing seen on surveillance cameras, the firearm that had matched casings found at the scene. But the defense pushed back, doing everything in their power to introduce doubt. Jason's attorney emphasized that cell tower triangulation isn't precise, arguing that the signals could have pinged off any of 3 different towers in that area. He insisted that the evidence was entirely circumstantial, that there was no eyewitness, no direct video footage of the crime, and no confirmed cause of death linking Jason beyond a shadow of a doubt. The defense attorney also offered a different motive for Jason's lies to police. It wasn't guilt, he said. It was embarrassment. He told the jury that Jason had concealed the truth of his relationship with Delene because he feared judgment from mutual friends. He didn't want others to know about their romantic involvement, as he believed it would be considered inappropriate or socially complicated within their friend group. That, the attorney argued, was the only reason Jason had misled investigators, not to cover up a crime, but to protect his reputation. Yet even as the defense built this alternate theory, the prosecution reminded the jury of one undeniable truth. Jason Gilley had changed his story again and again, each new version conflicting with the last, each new twist coming only after new evidence had emerged. That, they said, was not the behavior of an innocent man. After both sides rested their cases, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. It was now in the hands of the jury to decide Jason Gilley's fate. The deliberations did not last long. Jason Gilley was found guilty of both kidnapping and murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was a sentence that would keep him behind bars for the rest of his natural life. To this day, Jason has never publicly admitted what truly happened that night.